Hey yo everyone, gather round. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and A Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right, and we're going to pick up on this episode right where Dr. Michael Yellowbird showed up just a little bit late. So here it is. Good morning, Dr. Yellowbird.
Hello. Sorry I'm late. I was trying to get it on my computer and it wouldn't work, so I had to go to my cell phone. So,
well, no worries. We're glad to have you. I've been chatting away with Fawn. Fawn, this is Dr. Yellowbird.
Good morning.
hello, Fawn.
We were just chatting about I'm in Fairbanks at the university, and Fawn is coming to us from Nome. So we were just talking a little bit about what it looks like in Nome. But now that we have Dr. Yellowbird here, let's push it forward a little bit. I was wondering, before we get started with Dr. Yellowbird, Fawn, can you tell us a little bit about your background? You live in Nome, but you're not a Nupiat, and you are actually from Oklahoma. Can you
That
give
is
us a little
correct.
background and how'd you end up in Nome and what's your roots?
So I grew up in Oklahoma. My name is Fawn, and I am enrolled in the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm descended also from the Katua Band of Cherokee Indians. My dad's Katua. And I grew up in Oklahoma, born and raised. And then after I graduated, I have an undergrad degree in psychology. So after I graduated with my psychology degree, I didn't know what to do. So I come from a long line of Ponca chiefs as well as United Methodist pastors. So through the United Methodist Church, they have an internship program where they send you off to do like different social justice type of things. And one of the places was in Nome. And so I got placed in Nome. I was super jazzed about it. And I think I was in my mid-20s. And moved up to Nome. It was a 2-year program. But in that 2 years, I worked at a nonprofit where we started up a children's home that housed children that were taken from unsafe home situations before they were placed in foster homes. And so my first summer there, there was a baby that was placed there, and so I helped with the baby every day, and then they were going to send him out of the region. So Nome is on the very northwest side of Alaska, and they were going to send him to Anchorage, which is super way south and super urban. And I was sad about it. And one of the social workers was like, well, you could be a foster parent. And he can stay here with you. And I was like, I'm by myself. I'm 1,000 miles away from anybody I know. And he was like, well, I mean, that it's just a possibility. So I filled out my paperwork to be a foster parent and fostered this baby, and ended up adopting him about a year later. And in the meantime, met my wife, and she's from here, so she's Siberian Yupik. And let's see, 14 years later, still here. We're still married, and we have four kids now. So I have a 14-year-old, a 8-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 20-month-old. So quite a spread and they're all boys. So quite a spread. And I am a juvenile probation officer for the state of Alaska. I've been working with the juvenile probation office for over 10 years now. But that's what I do here in Nome, and I'm planning on staying here for a while.
Yeah, Fawn. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you with us on the podcast this morning. It's been great working with you preparing for this week. So thanks for coming. I was wondering if you might do the honor of introducing Dr. Yellowbird for us.
Sure. And then Dr. Yellowbird, I watched a couple of videos. Do you have a way that you introduce yourself before I go with my written introduction? Or
No.
or you could do it after?
I'm sure it'd be fine. It's fine.
Okay. All right. So today, as a guest on our podcast, we have Dr. Michael Yellowbird. He is the Dean and Professor of the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. He's an enrolled member of the MHA Nation in North Dakota, and what is Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. He has held faculty and administrative appointments at the University of British Columbia, University of Kansas, Arizona State University, Humboldt State University, and North Dakota State University. His research focuses on the effects of colonization and methods of decolonization, ancestral health, intermittent fasting, indigenous mindfulness, Neuro-Decolonization, mindful decolonization, and the cultural significance of res dogs. He is a founder, director, and principal investigator of the Center for Mindful Decolonization and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba. He serves as a consultant, trainer, and senior advisor to several BIPOC mindfulness groups and organizations who are seeking to incorporate mindfulness practices, philosophies, and activities to indigenize and decolonize Western mindfulness approaches in order to address systemic racism and engage in structural change. He is also the author of numerous scholarly articles, book chapters, and research reports, and the co-editor of several books. And here we have Mr. Dr. Michael Yellowbird.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Fawn. And Christiane, thank you for inviting me to your podcast. So, I guess a lot of the work that I do these days is kind of shifted somewhat from that. What you're reading, that's kind of an older bio, and I have several times, but the old seem to float out there a bit. A lot of my work is focused a lot on being all my work that's in contemplative and mindfulness research, scholarship, and practice. Also, probably more a newer piece to my profile is that I've been what they would call a decolonial contemplative mentor to a lot of scholars and practitioners who are finding themselves doing work in the mindfulness and contemplative fields, working with different populations. So I've been doing a lot of my writing in that area these days, and some of the research that I'm doing these days has to do a lot with that. So that's kind of where I'm finding myself in my current bed of research. Although I write about so many different topics, and people ask me to write about a lot of different topics. So I'm spending a lot of time kind of dipping in a little bit here and there, and responding and to people's requests and invitations to help support their work in different ways. So that's what I've been doing. So, yeah.
Dr. Yellowbird, like I said before, we're very honored to have you. We feel very privileged to have you join us to engage in dialogue with us. And I think the first question that I have is your work in mindful decolonization and integrating indigenous wisdom with mindful practices leads us towards transformative thinking. It's a path that encourages us to reflect, to understand, and to act toward a more connected world. So could you share with us a story maybe about your journey toward mindful decolonization, and maybe tell us what it is and what were some of the pivotal moments?
Sure. So when I'm thinking about mindful decolonization, I always think about how the work that I've done, has been specifically to enact a contemplative sort of mentorship to folks. And I've spent a lot of time doing mindfulness and contemplative practices. Actually, I started in about 1975 when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota in Crookston. And one of the things I've done is to, not only practicing in Eastern forms of mindfulness for more than 40 years, but also how traditional indigenous contemplative ceremonies and practices, sort of have an integration with that. So the common denominator among contemplative practices that help folks find the benefits, and the well-being from that. It's a really good bed of neuroscience, neurobiology that talks about contemplative practices. So I have a really kind of clear understanding these days about how some of the ceremonies and some of the rituals and that Indigenous people were involved in. Really now, of course, they've got an evidence base that's thousands and thousands of years old, but now today Western science has sort of caught up with that and is looking at, what's happening to the brain and the body in terms of when people engage in these really deep contemplative practices. So I've really investigated a lot of that, these days. But it's for me, it's like, starting with the practices for many years. Almost every morning when I wake up, I engage in these contemplative practices. My great grandfather named Plentyfox, who was an Arikara holy man, and my father, he always talked about how fortunate it was to be raised by Grandpa Plentyfox, and since he bestowed upon my father, a lot of special stories, prayers, and the sacredness of silence, which my father passed on to me. And it's interesting when I think back, about this story. About my father used to talk about how his grandpa Plentyfox, my great grandfather, as he woke up, before his feet touched the earth or touched the ground, he would be laying in his bed, singing and a song before his feet touched the floor. Then he would light some sage, from a special place. My father was telling me, special place that was watched over by the guardian spirits of the plants. Whether people believe that or not is immaterial. It was the belief in his mind and my father's mind. I understood how, what it was doing to their brain and to their cellular levels and their genetics. How they were expressing, a deep sort of reverence for this time. They woke up, and I remember when my father would talk about, how Grandpa Plentyfox got up and he closed his eyes and he'd start shaking his sacred gourd, and he'd early in the morning and he'd start singing this prayer song he said he'd thank his dreams for speaking to him, and then he'd finish, and then he'd go outside. He'd stand outside of his lodge or his house in silent meditation for a period of time. And when he was done, probably praying and meditating, he began to sing a song, that would give thanks to the sun for life, for light, and the blessings that were bestowed upon all humans and creatures of the earth, right? And it was at this time, he would start singing, and then of course acknowledge, the stars that were kind of fading away in the early morning light, right? And then the presence of the rising sun. I remember my father describing that to me. I thought it was so beautiful the way he described it, because my father was a little boy, he'd be standing with his grandfather there. And the funny part was that he'd say, and we had these res dogs. He didn't call them res dogs, but these dogs would be watching the thing, So, but as he sang this song, he said, we offer this song since the Arikara people believe that when we pass from this place and make our journey to the spirit world, the stars serve as guides to other worlds that we got to travel to in order to kind of find our place out in the cosmos, right? And once we arrive there, he says that we become whole again, and we become centered with all things that once were. So for me, when I wake up, in the darkness, and I get up almost every morning really early and meditate, and then I do my workout and all those kinds of things. But as the sun is rising, I begin my own meditation by lighting sage and asking the spirits of the plants for their protection. I was a sun dancer for many years and was able to kind of participate in a lot of ceremonies, right? And as the smoke would arise, as the smoke arises like from the burning embers, right? I still feel like I feel my father and Grandpa Plentyfox that are with me, and remind me to humbly call to the smoke to come to me, to wash over me, bless me, purify me from bad dreams and the day's previous heaviness. So in the morning when I begin my own song, I try to do it as gently and respectfully as possible, and I sing phrases of this different song over and over again, about the smoke. Right? I sing these, focus on the words, the meaning, and the profoundness of the moment, which is really what contemplative practices are all about. And so I'll say it in English. The prayer is, "Smoke be with me," as you light the sage. Right? Smoke blesses me. Smoke clears the way so that I may see more clearly. And smoke makes me invisible to the spirits of deception and doubt. Is kind of like how this all sort of works, right? And then I guess. And then I sit there, I finish, I sit silently for about an hour or so. And like all folks that do contemplative practices, I really pay close attention to my body, my mind, my thoughts, my breath, and my emotions that have all arisen over time. I kind of check in what's going on with me. And I always remember that the smell of burning sage or burnt sage helps me kind of return to the state of awareness. What am I doing, right? What is my intention? You know, what is the present moment telling? And so, for me, I guess recovering from trauma, for years, when I sing and pray, I always smile to myself, and I find that I'm relieved of my suffering. And sometimes in earlier stages when I was meditating, I would experience my own emotions and have very difficult memories that would cause me to stop and wipe my tears away and blow my nose and gather my thoughts and feelings in order to continue the song and the rituals that I needed to do. And I always thought, to me, at first I thought, tears were a sign of weakness, but as I've grown older and, become sort of more understanding of the purpose of that, I no longer regard tears as a sign of weakness or a distraction or emotional dysregulation or even trauma. I've learned that vulnerability is a blessing, essential to entering and understanding the sacred space that we all need to enter every day. We have to bring all of that with us. Tears and deep emotions can generate, for me, compassion, clears the mind and the spirit, and it enables me to see and experience the reality in different ways. Otherwise, you're holding that back, right? You need to open up completely. So in my work, all these many years, I've used meditation and Indigenous contemplative practices throughout my career to sustain my own thinking, my equanimity, my compassion, which has been difficult sometimes, and to enable me to confront colonialism in higher education. And as a dean now, and even as a professor, but more as a dean now, I really understand that colonialism in the academy involves the invasion of cultural and personal spaces. And it's really about the control of the institutional discourse, the subjugation of these diverse peoples, values, ideas, beliefs. And for some, it's the exploitation of the fear and the doubt and the uncertainty of those who lack the power. Right? So that's kind of really sort of where I've kind of brought it, in my life. And of course, in my office and during meetings, a lot of times I will, burn sage to start the meetings. Sometimes I'll invite elders in to do the same, to say good words and say a prayer, and ask others sometimes of my faculty to lead a short meditation practice exercise. And that's all for the purpose of setting a positive tone, opening up these cultural spaces and spiritual spaces so that people can feel safe. Throughout my career, I've created undergraduate and graduate mindfulness courses, and that have helped students. I think they have helped students build resilience, reduce their stress, reduce their anxiety, improve their social and emotional learning, and use it to take care of themselves. In social work, we know that we're dealing with a lot in social work. There's a lot that we bring in. Most of us social workers, the reason we got into social work is because we carry our own burdens, right? We had that experience, so we come in to try to change the world. And then we come in, we have colleagues that have the same burdens. And then you have students that have been traumatized that want to learn. And then the students that are in faculty that are exposed to communities out there that are still facing trauma. You've got the perfect emotional storm there, anxiety storm. So for me, it's like, how do we begin to do something that helps kind of bring that diffused energy back to the center, to help decolonize the mind and the body, and give people the opportunity to envision, something greater than themselves, and change, and the possibility of transformation. And how do you envision decolonizing methodologies that can create insights and pathways to practice and teaching and research that eliminates, colonization. So those are some of the things that I've kind of done in my work. I've done quite, I think the first time I ever taught any contemplative mindfulness practices was when I was a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, In 1991, I think was the first time I taught a course in, or taught practice. And then when I took my first job at the University of British Columbia, one of my students who was in the practicum, white student, was asking me to come down to the Aboriginal Friendship Center on East Hastings in Vancouver. She said, can you do an activity? I'm not sure what to do with the Indigenous students. I'm kind of a little bit intimidated. So I came down, I talked to the students, and then I did a mindfulness practice with them, and they loved it. It really resonated with them. So I've kind of done that when I was at Arizona State University. In 2000 was the first time I introduced it into a social work class formally, one of my graduate classes, and the students start talking about it when they left the class, and all of a sudden this reporter from the Arizona State University State Press, the student newspaper, came to my room and class, and they start taking pictures of the students meditating and wrote a story about it because they hadn't seen anyone doing this in classes before. So it was it's kind of been that sort of thing, and for me, and I've really focused a lot of my career on teaching, research, and scholarship and service and activism that challenges colonialism. And so I've used mindful decolonization, neurodecolonization as forms of contemplative practice to address those inequities, that racism, that white supremacy, that privilege that exists, and especially the fragility. I mean, I've seen a lot of fragility over the years, a lot of fragility. Students collapse and get angry and accuse me of hating white people and hating the United States. It's just, but it's kind of been that thing for me, is to kind of go back and to deal with students compassionately. And they want me, and they report me to a dean. They report me to the undergraduate social work program. But but I didn't change. I didn't change my material. I just kind of worked on them so that they became more and more open to it. I had to deal with white fragility a lot, but that's kind of that's one of the costs, and one of the things that we have to do is we have to be able to deal with that in order to kind of inspire them to move forward too. So, and it's really, neurodecolonization for me is a term that I created, and it's really involves training the mind, to overcome the destructive thoughts, feelings, and emotions and behaviors that are associated with the traumas of colonization. And there are plenty of those, right? For me, neurodecolonization enables us as individuals or families or communities to engage in what I call mindful activism, anti-colonialism, truth-telling, and compassionate decolonization, where we can begin to step into this place where we respectfully, but we are kind of got our eyes on the prize of how we reconcile with oppressors. So.
Thanks for that, Dr. Yellowbird. I want to dig a little deeper into the education side of it. What does a decolonized classroom look like to you? Like, can you paint us a picture? What do your classrooms look like, and what methods do you use?
Well, I think the first thing before it becomes decolonized, one of the things folks have to recognize is not only the advent, but the spread and the ubiquity of colonization, how in its many different forms. And that's the first thing, is to kind of talk about, what is colonization? What happens during the period of colonization when, an external entity comes in and begins to manipulate, invade, and to control, your agency to think, to produce, to react to things that may be harmful to others and yourself, right? I think for me it's a lot like I would compare it to groupthink in a way. Colonization is really like a lot of groupthink, where people know something is wrong, yet they self-censor because they don't want to be ostracized or isolated from the group, right? They want to be part of the group. So I think that's the thing, is understanding, with a decolonized classroom, what does it mean to be colonized, right? And there's a saying, I work a little bit with horses and horse people, like equine psychotherapists, and there's this horse trainer. His name is John Lyons, and he said, the strongest halter in the world is in the horse's mind. The control of the horse is in its mind, and that's kind of, I think Stephen Bilko said that too as well. The strongest aspect of colonization for the oppressor is the mind of the colonized, right? And so it's reading some of those books, like introducing students to the book like The Colonizer and The Colonized, any of these kinds of books that help sort of develop a context for understanding what colonialism is. And then to begin to move towards understanding what decolonization is in its many different forms. There's the sort of the clinical health decolonization of viruses and bacteria, right, which is very similar to decolonizing in human populations. So it's that sort of thing, is understanding those two first aspects, kind of really, really operationalizing, those, and conceptualizing them really well. Like, what does it mean to have these different levels of colonization, decolonization? Another thing that I've done is I've created a linear equation for decolonization. And the linear equation kind of spells out different kinds of things that need to be done in order to reach the level of for example, it may be, in my equation I have like decolonization equals, mind body, right? Mind body, with a subscript on there, how many times, or what does that mean? I won't go through to explain it because it's pretty hard to explain, but it's like each one of these pieces in the equation has to do with empowerment, has to do with realization, has to do with soul searching, has to do with in different ways, colonization, and part of it is also the period of decolonization. Well, it goes in phases. Let me move from that equation to phases. So in the model that I've developed is the first phase of decolonization that I talk with students about is purification and cleansing from these colonized ideas about white supremacy, about privilege, about stereotypes, all these different kinds of things, all the things that have been created by colonizing forces that have been instituted, in programs and educational systems, in language and laws and so on, right? It's a lot like settler colonialism in that sense. And having students outline those different kinds of things that they see that they need to cleanse from. Then moving from that particular circle and model, then you move down to, say, to the right, and there's another circle or another level of decolonization, and that's the level of Renaissance. And I talk a lot about how that we have to rediscover traditional ideas, practices, lifestyles, and any of those kinds of things that prove to be helpful to Indigenous people and all people, really, like rethinking our relationship with the environment, rethinking our relationship to all sentient beings and animals, rethinking our relationship to community, and so on. And then there's a lot of different kinds of things that Indigenous people have used, like songs, ceremonies, different kinds of symbols, whatever it is that they want, that need to be resurrected again for the purpose of supporting who Indigenous people are, and anybody really that wants to kind of spend their time in decolonization, right, or to The final phase of the model then is what I call the period of enlightenment. And the period of enlightenment, is the period where we develop a practice to begin to give our mind a sense of creativity, and to begin to look at new technologies, new ways of thinking, new ideas, new approaches, any of those kinds of things that will help us, enable us to begin to move towards transformation and enlightenment in our world. So there are many of those too, right? I mean, right now I've been having a lot of discussions with folks about the use of AI in social work, and understanding what is it, what can it do for us, right? How will it help us? How do we need to kind of understand it will challenge us, right? And most of the models that I think are healthy models kind of look at, well, there's one way to look at AI, and AI is going to be in charge of everything at some point, right? That's what they call singularity, when the machines. Otherwise, it's over here where the people are, and the people continue to kind of manage, world affairs, using their limited creativity and their way of looking at the world, right? their limited abilities to kind of foresee and understand, trends and those kinds of things. Or there's the hybrid model, like we've always done as human beings. We use the technology with the human together and sort of work, co-evolve, and create solutions and so on. We've done that, all the time. We meet a new group of people, and here we are. We sort of co-evolve together. We discover things that we didn't know, and they discover things they didn't know about us, and we share those technologies and ways of theories and thinking and philosophies. We've done that with animals, right? You're in Alaska long before there were skidoos and those kinds of things. People give dogs to travel, right? So dogs are kind of a form of enlightenment for human beings, so technology as well as companions and so on. Way down south here, my tribe, the Arikaras, we encountered horses about the 1500s, and that was something that we had never seen a horse before, but we engaged the horse, became part of our families and who we were. It was a different technology. It wasn't just the horse acting on its own, but the human and the horse coming together to create a level of transformation and transcendence of our current state that made us, changed us in some ways for the better. In other ways, horses are used for, warfare and that kind of thing too as well. So we have to always consider those possibilities. Anyway, that's kind of, really a bit about what neurodecolonization would look like, in my classroom. Those kinds of discussions would really be deep, and they would have a lot of, breadth as well, depth and breadth.
Yeah, I wish we had 10 hours for this podcast, because everything that you say, I feel like I want to pick your brain further about it. But you mentioned AI. How do you feel that fits into like indigenous studies programs or into social work with indigenous paradigms?
Well, I find a lot of value in AI and machine learning. I mean, first of all, I was trained as a quantitative researcher, so I've had a lot of experience assembling numbers and working with equation modeling and those kinds of things back in the day when I was a PhD student. I understand how that works. I understand how you can feed a computer information, and you can come up with some really high probabilities that something may or may not work or make sense. And it's like a machine is like an animal. It kind of gives us a sense of something that we can't do very quickly. There's no way. I mean, when I first started out doing my statistics courses in my PhD program, and I did a number of them, I mean, everything was done by a hand calculator. I had to sit there and do all my hand calculations until finally, I moved on to the period where I started doing these more complex models. Then I had to use what they call the VAX. Most people have never even heard of a VAX, but it's this large computing center that it could only handle so much data at a time. So all the PhD students from all the different disciplines had to get into line, into queues, and feed their data into there to have it do its manipulations of the different factors that you were analyzing, right, to give them some kind of number values, and then to find out, whether what you were exploring was significant or not significant. So when I look at, the computers, what AI is doing now, it's incredible. I mean, the power of the machine to search, the web and whatever you can give it, and to analyze that information and put something together so quickly. It's solving so many problems for us right now. I mean, it's just read an article recently about the use of an antibiotic, a new antibiotic for human beings, and it was something like there were like 60,000 or so many thousand molecules that were involved that needed to be studied, and to find out how people would react to this particular kind of medicine. Well, it would have taken the estimates. It took the machine, a few days to do the calculations, which would have taken a team of the most talented, doctors and researchers probably 2 years to figure out. Right? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about this capacity that exists that we don't even know the extent of it right now. So what about, how does it work with Indigenous social work and studies? Well, I've looked at it, and I've talked with some young women out in Toronto who are AI experts, they've developed a mental health sort of approach to using AI and avatars. They contacted me because they read some of my work. You know, their AI system picked up some of my work, so they contacted me and said, "How would you like to work with us?" And I said, "Well, tell me what to do." So they said they're using AI and these avatars and getting this literature that they get and feeding that into the AI system, and they're using it in rural and indigenous communities. And I said, "Well, that's interesting." And they said, "We're using some of your stuff." And I said, "Okay." And they said every time that, you know, this avatar of this old grandmother with braids on who can speak perfect Anka, for example, speak perfect Arikara, looks like grandmother, and you know, if you heard the voicing that they can do, AIs can, they can sound just like you know, a lot of these musicians or singers, they can compose. That's how good they are. And then you've got the person sitting in front of you. You've got grandma, you know. You know, your Katua grandmother sitting there in front of you, and she's smiling at you, and she's beaming at you, right? Just like you are now. I don't know if you're real because I'm seeing you here. This, you know, on this you know, I don't know if maybe you could be AI for all I know. I don't know the way the brain works, but you're talking to me, and I'm having a conversation with you through this system. And so if you had, and I was telling these PhD students, I said, if you had this grandmother that could speak the right language, she had these algorithms running all the time. So as you have your hand on your face and you're nodding your head, you know, slowly like this, she's picking all that up and it's coming back in, and she's running an algorithm. Every time you respond to a particular word, a certain frequency in the language, the way things are said, the intonation, those kinds of things, grandma gets better and better and better at reading you. Pretty soon, she knows exactly where to go to kind of touch and to support you, right? The other thing that grandma does is she doesn't get bored. She doesn't lose focus. She's with you. Her eyes, her facial expressions, her body language all signal to you what you need to hear. It's no different than people calling a complete stranger on the suicide line and getting them to talk them out of committing suicide or harming themselves. Only now you have something that is way more sophisticated, way more accurate, way more, you know, touching to you as a human being. So there's a ton, you know. It's unbelievable to me. I think the amount of I don't know, promise and potential it has to help us, you know, in our fields and with Indigenous folks as well. If you can imagine a grandmother who could speak the language or have memories that are accurate, or have ceremonial knowledge, or have any of these kinds of things that gets better and better and better each time the algorithm runs, and they learn how to transmit it better and better and better each time they teach. I mean, it's, you know, that's just one example that I could draw from Indigenous studies and social work. So,
how do you approach the topic with your students?
same way. I say, you know, I give them the example. I've written a little bit about it, and I ask them questions. It's more probing, like, what do you think? I describe the scenario. I talk about, you know, what AI does, what machine learning does, and how it can get better and better each time it does it, right? And how, at some point, if we had these kinds of, you know, AI, machine learning sort of, I don't know, social workers, you know, it could probably lead to transformation much more quickly than just a person, because it takes a person a long time to kind of get through that. You know, the person can be traumatized, you know, kind of a secondhand sort of trauma can happen to a social worker or whatever, and they can get off track, or they can get bored, or whatever it is. But an AI social worker, you know, is going to be a lot more, you know, I guess tuned in, really tuned in. That in that sense, theoretically, what would be happening is that healing would be happening a lot quicker. A lot more people would be getting a sense of you know, themselves and a sense of well-being much earlier, right? Which would produce a lot of, I think, a lot more creativity, a lot more happiness, a lot more compassion, a lot more you know, transformation for people. So that's how I kind of approach it with social work. As I said, it doesn't mean social workers are going to be out of business. I think what we need to do is develop this hybrid sort of working with the machine. And we've done that already. We've done that with old videotapes when we tape having sessions with someone. Then we go back and look at it and say, well, this is what you could have done better. This is what you could have done better. What you can do. We've been using that kind of technology all along, but now we have a huge capacity to do it even more accurately, much more quicker, much more compassionately, and so on. So.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer. We have a question in the chat, and then I'm going to turn it over to Fawn for a while. But Alicia says, I heard you mention a previous fear of crying, which is something I see with a lot of people I work with. Alicia's an LCSW, by the way. I like to introduce yoga to help people get more in touch and more comfortable with the mind-body connection. I'm wondering if you have advice to help support them with any other mindfulness-based practices.
Okay, I missed the very first part. Could you repeat that?
It says, I heard you mention a previous fear of crying, which is something I see with a lot of the people I work with. I like to introduce yoga to help people to get more in touch and more comfortable with the mind-body connection. I'm wondering if you have any advice to help support them with any other mindfulness-based practices.
I think, it's what I do in my work that I do. It's not just sitting mindfulness or yoga. I mean, a lot of it has to do with a lot of different practices we should be doing all the time. Movement is so important. Being outside, running and moving, getting your heart rate up, raises the level of endocannabinoids in the brain, raises the level of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which protects brain cells, and also it keeps the ones from failing, and it creates neurogenesis. Dancing does the same thing. Dancing is not only ceremonial and cultural, but it raises the level of endocannabinoids in the brain. It protects the brain. It reduces cortisol levels. It improves brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And also, one of the things that we know about dancing now, complex dancing, with populations that are experiencing mild, memory loss, is that it begins to restore memory. It begins to restore, thinking. That's just running and dancing. What about singing? I've looked at studies that show that singing has some of the most profound effects for raising people's level of endocannabinoids, raising their sense of well-being and happiness, raising their BDNF, protecting their brain. And by the way, I wrote a chapter over a year ago now. I think it's out published in this book, but Indigenous people's health. But I looked at the research, and it showed how quickly Indigenous people, where the level of dementias and neurodegenerative diseases was just growing exponentially, right? But yet you see all these things in the literature like dancing, running, singing, ceremonial stuff, like sitting in hot places or cold places, just purposely, like in a hot sauna or a sweat lodge, or sitting outside in ice cold water like our ancestors did. All those things produce these really dynamic changes in the body. And I call them mindfulness practices too as well. I mean, sitting in a hot sauna, for instance, raises what they call heat shock proteins in the cells. Heat shock proteins are an indicator of well-being, healthy skeletal muscles, and a sign of longevity when you have a lot of them, which is why you see in a lot of the period historical narratives and pictures that you see a lot of healthy Indigenous people out there. They were doing these kinds of things. Cold is the same thing. Some of us who were raised in cold climates have the same kind of response to cold as hot, where we get cold shock proteins. It's the same thing. Raises endocannabinoids in the brain. We have to be, with that mindfully, with that cold or that heat, and it also protects the brain, and it also produces what's called brown fat. Brown fat is the fat that burns quickly, creates more muscle tone, greater skeletal muscles, and so on. When you're out running mindfully, you're singing and praying as you run and move along, and you're feeling the earth, and sometimes with no shoes on. Something happens in the body. The enzymes change in the body, so that protects you against depression disorders, right? This called kynurenine expression changes from a toxic level to one that's kynureninic acid in the body when you run, when you do some running, when you're moving along, which adults used to do. They run and they play outside, they hunt outside, they run after animals and game. They run, that was the movement. We evolved to do that. It's all part of what I call mindfulness practices. So there are many different kinds of ones that I've found in the literature that Indigenous people have done forever around the world that we really don't do much in our practice anymore. We kind of go to one thing, whether it's like sitting meditation or whether it's talk therapy or whatever it is. We don't incorporate these other different kinds of things into it, which is the holistic way of thinking about it. So.
Yeah, thanks, Elisa, for the question, and thanks, Dr. Yellowbird, for the answer. Fawn, I'd like to turn it over to you. Next 30 minutes are yours.
Yeah, I was just making a couple notes as you were talking, and I have those same kind of memories too with my grandmother. And so my grandma, her name was Francine Eagle, and she was married to my grandfather, who was Levi Big Goose, and they were raised around Ponca City area. Right south of Ponca City is our small reserve called White Eagle, so that's where they're from. And I lived with my grandma for a little bit growing up, and she had the same mindfulness techniques of, in the morning, early in the morning, you could hear her singing as she was waking up. And that's something that is I don't incorporate anymore in my life. And, one of my major areas of interest is parenting, Indigenous parenting and child welfare. And I think that is something that is extremely important to go back to, and you had talked about moving and dancing, and all of my children are all adopted, and they're all from this area. They're all Inupiaq or Yupik, but my Ponca people have welcomed them. They've all had their giveaway ceremony and all gotten Ponca names, and they all really enjoy dancing. And so, being away from my people down there, it's I do everything I can to help them stay connected to our culture. But here in Nome, they have a very strong Indigenous culture. My wife grew up a hunter, and that's not something that's normally done as women, but she had great male role models. She had great uncles who would be able to take her out on the ice and take her out on these different hunts. And so all of our kids are all learning how to do that. I watched a video where you had done a presentation, and you talked about the three, what was it? Cleansing, Renaissance, and Enlightenment. And that was something I really enjoyed hearing you talk about. But there was a girl that had asked a question at the end that was like, when we're working with Native people, a lot of times they're in survival mode. Like myself, I'm in survival mode 90% of the time. And like, how can we get to that cleansing period? How can we get to, incorporate just basic things? Because sometimes in the morning, like my baby's ready to wake up and I don't have time to meditate or sing. Like I got to wake up and get my baby and get all the kids up and ready for school, and like, what are some basic things that people can incorporate when we're just trying to survive?
Well, it's an interesting question, Fawn, because in order to answer that, I need to go back just a little bit, but I'll answer your question. First of all, we're living in a way that is not natural. All people lived in communities at one time, and the children were sort of the province of a lot of mothers and aunties and stuff, grandmothers. We live in a way that is it's not even Western. It's a different kind of way of living, because even Western at some point lived, in groups, communities where they shared, parenting responsibilities. So we've kind of been in that place for a while, which really doesn't work well in terms of communicating and developing a collectivism, right? We want collectivism to be a part of our cultures, all cultures, because it means that there's a good, strong, healthy dependency and interdependence and relationship that we have with one another. There's even markers, in the evolutionary biology of our species. One of those things, I encourage everyone to look it up. It's called the grandmother hypothesis. The grandmother hypothesis goes that one of the reasons women live longer than men is because grandmothers had additional roles. This was their job. This was part of their career. They didn't retire. When moms, all the aunties went out to gather and hunt, like you said, who stayed home with the kids? Well, grandmas. And so the grandmas were all the teachers at one time. You know, they were, and that's not something that's so far fetched that couldn't be returned to in terms of of the world that we live in. But they took care of the kids, right? They mentored the children. They told them stories, which kept their brains healthy, kept their bodies healthy, kept their bones strong. Now, if we look at elders today, you know, they've got diabetes, they've got hypertension, metabolic diseases like obesity. You know, they're run the risk of getting dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and so on, because their brains are not, you know, active anymore. Their bodies, they get osteoporosis, and the bones are weak because they don't carry heavy stuff like our great grandmothers used to do, carrying loads and this and hunting and those kinds of things. So we're living in a world that's out of balance, first of all. So I think it's really important that I say that, you know, all these diseases, you know, I talk to so many people that I think are fairly young yet, you know, in their 60s, and they have osteoporosis. Their bones are hollowed out because, you know, they sit all day in chairs, they don't move around, and, you know, of course and rather than giving natural, you know, natural medicines and stuff, they end up taking steroids, which then increases, you know, the loss of calcium in the bones and all these different other kinds. So the backdrop of the story is that we're living in a very unnatural kind of state as, you know, Homo sapiens, right, as people. How do we do this then? I think is really important to kind of reconnect and kind of redevelop some of those ideas so that there is sort of a, you know, a cross-pollination of responsibility that's shared by, you know, groups of people that do that, and some people do that now. You know, they take turns watching each other's children. They take turns, you know, being with one another. But part of that has to start early with mothers, you know, who are young. Sisters used to do it all the time, right? But you're moving into a community, which is, again, one of those urban areas, which, again, is sometimes people don't know their neighbors at all. So it's very, very difficult to do that kind of thing. So caring for kids and for parenting, I think, is not something that's easily resolved with the, you know, this is why social work exists, because we had to come up with, you know, these folks in these professions to, you know, to plug the holes and all the leaks that were happening in social relationships. You know, in the past, you know, people didn't have these diseases like anxiety, especially depression, are novel diseases. You'll hear this from evolutionary biologists and psychologists. People could not survive, and the genes would have not gone on had, you know, people have been falling into depression and anxiety disorder. You know, there was such a really strong support of people. You know, they were the insula in the brain, which is kind of, you know, sees, you know, what's happening out there, informs us of our ability to kind of develop mental awareness of the state of others. You know, the mental state of others, as well as you know, an emotional intelligence. That part of the brain isn't activated very often, you know, you know, with some of the things that we do. So sometimes things like sitting meditation or any kind of other meditations can help activate the insula so that we get better and better at reading the emotional state of others, right? When kids are distressed or when mothers are in distress, or we see it, you know, some people see that, and then immediately they'll see a mother in distress with a child, complete stranger, they'll walk right over and they'll help that mother out. Can I help you, right? A lot of people will just sort of avoid and whatever. That person who went and helped the other person, I would bet, you know, a lot of money that they have a very active insula in the brain. So when you get back to collectivist cultures, that was survival. Everyone's insula had to be tuned in about the mental state of all the people in the village. They had to have this, you know, sense of emotional intelligence to kind of understand, right? So that's the thing why I do a lot with meditation and contemplative practices, because they help build that part of our emotional intelligence. It should start early with kids. If you want to build a community around that, you know, get some, you know, families together, and mothers and fathers come together and all practice mindfulness and compassion practices with all the kids all together, you know, a couple times a night. Then let kids play. I think that's a really important parenting kind of, you know, skill that could be done, as well as, you know, something that, you know, people could rely upon. just think it's an investment in the future of those kids, because they're going to bond together, not just by playing together, but developing compassion, developing, cognitive flexibility in their prefrontal cortex and so on. And again, this is what societies did a long time ago. I'm not telling you anything that isn't new, but we have the neuroscience now to kind of prove it, I guess, to kind of show, changes in the brain when people engage in those kinds of things. So.
There was a question in the chat. It says, mindfulness can be hard to come by for many. Like Fawn had mentioned, many parents are in survival mode and don't have the time to take a moment to themselves. If a caregiver is in survival mode, what ways can the child be affected, and how can we ensure that the child is not in survival mode with their caregiver?
Well, I have a hard time believing that even if you're in survival mode, like our ancestors were a lot more poor than we were. They didn't have microwaves and cell phones and heat and hot showers and cars and stuff. I mean, they were out there in the cold and the hot, in the deserts and the mountains, wherever, and contemplative lifestyles became part of whoever they were. So it's like anything else. If you brush your teeth, you've got a few minutes to be mindful as you. If you wash your hands, you're washing dishes, you've got a few minutes to be mindful about what you're doing. If you're weaving a basket, or if you're singing a song, you're doing anything, that's all about mindfulness, right? So I think, and then of course you break your own blocks off. I've had to do it for years, and I've got 4 grown sons, and they're all out and about, and my youngest one is 41. I've got 4 young daughters. The oldest is 16, 14, 10, and 6. So through all those groups, through all those kids, I spend a lot of time meditating with them. And how do I get my time? I get up really early to meditate, made it a priority, because I know I need it for myself. I need it in my parenting. I need it as part of my patience. I need it, to stay courageous, to be thoughtful, to regulate my emotions, to be creative, right? It's so important. It's like breathing to me. It's the breath of life. It's the same kind of thing. So, and what was the second part about kids? You said children.
How can we ensure that the child is not in survival mode with their caregiver?
I'm not sure what that means. Maybe the whoever wrote the question can clarify just a bit. I think I know, but I don't want to just take a shot at something. Survival mode with the caretaker. I think let me say this with kids. I think kids are constantly in the level of survival mode. They have to be in order to kind of get their needs met. We know that now. What's happened with children? There's a phenomenon, in the neuroscience research and genetic science research, cellular research science, that says, when children are born and they're in the womb developing, at some point, during their development, some of their cells escape through the uterus into mom's bloodstream. They call that microchimerism, right? After this creature with all these different heads and arms and stuff, Greek thing. So those cells, what they do is they migrate, into mom's bloodstream, and some of them actually end up in the mom's brain. And if you know about Francisco Varela's work and other people who have done work on cellular research, we know that cells communicate they with one another. They have cell talk. For example, if there are 4 cells, just a real kind of crude sort of example, and one cell dies after so long, a new cell has to be born, and the other 3 cells actually teach the other cell what its job is, to look out for autoimmune disorders and invaders in the system, whatever, or to kind of send messages, right? So cells are dying all the time and being reborn, and there's a lot of cell talk going on. So we know as the baby in the mom's womb, some of the cells pass through the uterus and they go up to mom's bloodstream and end up in her brain. And so the current thinking around that is that when researchers have done the investigations of mom's brains, they find these baby cells that in the brain after many decades that are still alive, because they replenish and they end up there, right? And some of those cells are still talking to mom's brain cells. What are they saying? We don't know, but some of the people that study the science say that they're probably saying to mom's brain, the baby's saying, feed me, I'm hungry. When I cry like this, feed me. Pick me up, I'm scared. Love me, take care of me, and so on. This is kind of what people think is an evolutionary sort of guarantee that our species will go on and mom won't forget the baby, right? So there's the love and the emotion, but there's also these cells that exist. And the cells that exist that are in mom's body, sometimes if a mother has a heart event, the baby cells will actually migrate to mom's heart and patch up mom. Some of them are specialized so they can actually start mom's heart beating again, right? And give it its rhythm back. So kids are always in survival mode, and so we know that from this long history of evolutionary biology. So kids aren't going to change overnight, unless they're given a very, very difficult, very, very traumatic experience where they have to move beyond survival. Kids are always going to be asking for this, always wanting this. The brains of babies and children and toddlers, even young people under the age of 25, fully developed, their cortices where there's enough, nerves and myelin sheath and talking back and forth between the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like the reasoning and the logical and part of the brain, back to the other part of the brain, which is the amygdala, the sort of emotional part of the brain. That's happening. So this is why, again, mindfulness is one of those things that helps create more white matter in the brain that strengthens those connections from the logical part to the emotional part, and that's where emotional regulation comes in. The more meditation, the better. We know that as children, meditate more, as adults meditate more, they get more gray matter in the brain. Gray matter is important because it helps in the regulation of negative emotions and so on. But one of the things it does too is it protects different parts of the brain that are functioning well, that it actually thins out when you're doing meditation in the amygdala. So the amygdala doesn't get hijacked and you're not in the place of fight, and flight and those kinds of things. You're much more calm, you're much more, emotionally adjusted. So this is, again, why I do a lot of the work that I do in mindfulness work. So I think if you're asking for some way to make sure they're not, in a survival state with a caretaker, that any program that works with children, any organization, child welfare, whatever it is, I think really needs to engage in understanding the science behind mindfulness and how you implement it into a program in your organization. Two PhD students and I just recently finished a book on mindfulness manual for Indigenous caretakers and Indigenous kids. We just finished a curriculum for that, and the goal of that is to kind of help build compassion between the caretaker and the child. So as the person does the meditation and they'll be trained in meditation, that every child they get, they'll have an extra level of compassion and understanding, which is exactly what mindfulness does, is kind of raise the level of awareness, raise the level of connection, raise the level of as I say, compassion and back and forth. So I think ours is the first that's ever been done that I'm aware of. But it's something that I again think that very fundamental, not something that's anything new, but it's an idea that's being tried kind of in the more current context.
Yeah, I wrote that down because, even if I myself am not able to fully incorporate it into my life, like I definitely am switching gears with my kids and trying to incorporate things that'll help them and build their toolbox to become, successful and happy and healthy adults. But switching gears, the UAF program, social work program, has a lot of Indigenous students, and it's really beautiful whenever I'm seeing pictures and like videos of all of the Indigenous people that are part of the program. Talking about your journey to get to where you got to where you are, like starting from whenever you were younger. Did you grow up on a reservation? Did you grow up, like, how did you grow up? And then how did you make the decision, like, oh, mindfulness is my jam, that's where I'm going to go?
Yeah, I actually did grow up on a reservation. I was born, and raised on a reservation for many years. I, in a community that had more res dogs than people sometimes, more blocks than that, than running cars sometimes. I grew up in poverty, like everyone did in part of the world. Challenges with racism, colonialism. We went to a day school, Indigenous day school, and during the days when teachers beat the hell out of you. This kind of they beat you up with rulers and stuff. If you couldn't read, or if you couldn't, or if you had to go to the bathroom and you couldn't wait, you got up and you got whacked. And I remember kids, crying in the classroom, and they would poop and pee on themselves because they were so afraid of the teachers. We were quite abused in some of those in some, places. So I grew up with like a lot of kids of those, and then as I got older, I went to a boarding school, which was a bit traumatic, but not as bad. It was turning over the nuns were getting too old to beat us up at that point. So and plus grown, so it was difficult. So grew up with that, but we grew up around ceremony. Yeah, I was fortunate because I was able to see a lot of the old ceremony. It's just as it was kind of going out, and it wasn't probably before I was born, maybe 10 years, 15 years before I was born is when, the government was allowing Indigenous people to practice again, and they were starting to have these big powwows down in my neck of the woods. We didn't have the powwows like they have today. We just had powwows that were out on the plains, and people from Ponca used to come up to our territory in North Dakota. They come up there and they do buffalo dances and stuff, right? And they park all these cars out on the plains and they'd sing and stuff, And then years later, we got these big circus tents, that people would dance. But yeah, so grew up around riding horses, res dogs. Every place we went, we walked. We all were hunters at one time and so on. So yeah, grew up on the res, had a lot of extended relatives, but also saw a lot of tragedy. I witnessed a lot of really intense moments in tragedy. I was a child of the Vietnam War, so I got to see a lot of the carnage that happened from that war when people came back home, from the war, and serving in the military. So a lot of that affected me, as I was saying earlier. So that when I was in school trying to study, a lot of those memories would come back, and I didn't feel, like I could focus on my studies very well. So I had to go out for runs and stuff. And it wasn't until I discovered meditation then that started to kind of bring the level of that noise down and down and down, and then I was able to kind of study a lot better. So that's how I first meditation. My first teacher was a guy by the name of Lawrence LeShan, who I never met, but I read his book, so I practiced from his book. And then that was back in '75. And then my second teacher was my Taekwondo teacher. I was a martial artist for many years, but when I first took up martial arts, he was my teacher. He was a Korean 7th Dan black belt. So he taught us about the no mind, just sort of allowing everything to go out of the mind, and when you were going to go out and you were going to spar, you were going to fight, in tournaments and so on, or pre-spar. That's one of the things we learned very early. So that's something I've kept for many years, and I taught many students the same techniques, that sort of thing. But then I started to get into more understanding about the crossovers between Indigenous contemplative practice and mindfulness after I was reading a lot more in the late 80s and early 90s, and then going to Sundance ceremonies on my own reservation, and then I started seeing the connection between the contemplative side of Indigenous ceremony. And then I kind of made the connection at that point, and then after that, I was able to kind of incorporate it into my classes, my courses, curriculum, all those kinds of things, and with my colleagues and students. So. It just made a lot of sense, and then after a while, people began to know my work and understand my work, and I started getting invited to communities to teach. I did start couple of projects at different schools, one in Northern California on the Klamath, California on the Yurok Reservation, and I did a project at Minnesota at the White Earth Reservation and the Circle of Life Academy, and I've taught, abroad too as well, trying to remind Indigenous people the importance of their traditional contemplative practices and how those sort of interface with the kind of the current, mainstream, what I call mainstream mindfulness practice now. And I've written about the topic, talked about it in my books, and at this point in my career, I've become, board members for, Mindfulness Council of Canada. I'm on the board of directors for the Global Compassion Coalition, and I've served as an external advisory member to the Mindfulness Center at Brown University. So I just do a lot of stuff. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to co-lead an all-Indigenous mindfulness retreat. So we're, so then I'm also on the Council of Elders for mindfulness practices, for the Southwest and New Mexico and places like that. So it's just, I've been doing it for many years, but it's something that I've tried to really bring, deeply into social work now too, as well, especially as a dean. So,
Christian, how much time do we have left?
I think you have to leave, right, Dr. Yellowbird?
Yeah, about 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, really quick. You've mentioned res dogs a couple times. What is your study with res dogs?
Oh, we did it. I grew up with res dogs, right? I mean, when we were kids, I've written about it in our latest book here. Let me see if I can get it here. This particular book here, if you've seen it, but you can actually, you don't have to buy the book, you can download it for free. It's open access. But I started talking about, res dogs a long time ago, and trying to figure out, like, what happened to the closeness that we had as Indigenous people with our dogs. They used to be very close to us, and now we see a lot of them, that are not with families anymore or whatever, and they struggle to survive. And I started thinking about that, and then I started running into folks that were interested in the same topic, and surprisingly, or this is all part of synchronicity, I guess. When I did my PhD program at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, I had a really close friend who, him and I, we suffered through stats together, and we'd hang out together, and we'd barbecue together, and go running together. So when we both graduated, he went to the University of Denver, and he developed, he was the founder and the director of the Institute for Human-Animal Connection. His name is Philip Tedeschi, and he was a close friend of mine in grad school. I hadn't seen him for years, and when I took my position out at Humboldt State University, which is now Cal Poly Humboldt in Northern California, I was watching TV one night, and I don't watch much TV, but I just happened to turn it on, and there he was. He was talking about, there's a show called, I think, Dangerous Encounters or Intimate Encounters, when people like have these really close relationships with animals that are dangerous, right? They raise these tiger cubs that end up, attacking them and eating them, and or they raise these full-grown buffalo that are walking around their house, and a 200-pound buffalo walking. And watching this, I was like, wow, people do this kind of stuff, right? So then he comes on and he's talking about that, and I was telling my wife, I said, hey, I know this guy, right? And she said, you don't know him. I said, no. I said, what's that? Phil. So then after the show was over, I contacted him, then we got together and we started talking, and then he was telling me about his work and I was telling him about my interests, and so we kind of start visiting over the years, and then finally his team and I got together. I contacted them. I said, I'd like to do this res dog study on my reservation. I want to know what happened during the period of colonization, how it tore us away from our relationship with dogs. And they thought it was a good idea, so they came up and we did this study about res dogs on our reservation. That's actually available too. It's Mandan, Hidads, and Arikara research on, I can't remember the title of the article right now, but it's res dogs, and you can find it on ResearchGate, but it's an open access article too as well. But when I looked at that, we interviewed these people, and they all talked about the sacredness of dogs and about how close dogs were to people. They were their babysitters, they were their companions, they were their guards, they were, also, spiritual beings, and different kinds of things they represented. It was very deep in the culture. In fact, in our culture as a Rikara people, we have a story about dogs. It's kind of an allegory at the end of our origin story, where the people were, early, just sort of becoming people. They offered blessings to all the different things on earth, right? They lit their sage and they made these offerings. They forgot to make the offerings, smoke offerings to the dogs. And the dogs were disappointed. They told the people, they said, now, because you did that, we will, we're going to follow you around, right? And our name is going to be sickness and death, and to help you not forget, right? And of course, that was the whole thing. People are to not forget, the importance of offering, sacred, blessings to all animals, to all creatures, to all things, right? So that's that kind of reminder of us that dogs are using that messenger for us to do that. So that's a bit how I got involved with res dogs. So when we were little kids, I tell in this book the story. I say, well, my mom, when we were little, we always had res dog puppies. We'd carry them around, My mom said, put the puppies down, don't carry the puppies. So we'd take them, put them back, and we'd be all dirty, and my mom would say, you all look like res dog puppies, right? So she said, I can't tell you the difference between you, and she'd laugh, right? But we were very close in that way. We all had our own dogs, and we hung out with. So it's like the people I work with now on equine psychotherapy workers. How they use horses. I was just with a group of last week, working with them and watching them work too as well. So dogs are pretty much the same. It's kind of like the AI again. Like I said, it's we develop a hybrid relationship with them. They work for us, and we work for them, right? So.
All right. Well, that's all I had.
Yeah, and we're out of time, so we'll let you go, Dr. Yellowbird. I just wanted to say one more time, big thank you from my heart to yours. It feels like an incredible privilege and an honor to have you here to share the space with us. I learned so much. I wish that we had much more time because I have so many questions. But thank you so much for the time that you were able to give us. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm glad I had a chance to visit with you all. So.
Thank
Hope
you.
it's not the last time. Take care.
All right. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. As we draw to a close on this enlightening episode, I want to extend a warm and heartfelt thank you to Dr. Michael Yellowbird for sharing his invaluable insights with us today. His contributions to the dialogue have left us with much to reflect upon. A big thank you also goes out to my co-host, Fawn, for her engagement and input throughout our discussion. Your perspectives have greatly enriched today's discourse. And moving forward, I'm excited to remind our listeners about episode 30, featuring Dr. Donna Baines and Bindi Bennett, which has already been recorded and I will make available soon. I thought their dialogue on decolonizing social work practices and inclusive education was very interesting, and had a lot of things that were important to say. I will reflect, and I'll reflect more on that actual episode as I go back and get it ready to publish. But I was a little bit bothered by some of the things that went down in the episode, and how, I guess you could say, how I felt that I was treated by one of my guests. But yeah, I hope that I handled that situation well, and I'll let you decide for that if you get a chance to listen to it. But anyways, that's episode 30, already recorded, be coming out soon. Additionally, I'm thrilled to announce our upcoming episode 31 with Doug Finkelstein, the founder of Empathic Health. We'll be delving into a captivating discussion on psychedelics, especially in therapeutic settings, exploring the essence of retreats, understanding the foundations of empathic health, examining the concept of integration circles, and reflecting on ways to maintain a balanced and healthy lifestyle. This discussion promises to be a profound exploration and is scheduled for a live recording next Thursday, October 2nd at 11 a.m. Alaska time. If you want to join, check us out in my Riverside studio. All right, and a huge thank you to the audience for tuning in, especially to those that joined the live recording. For for your participation. Your engagement is what helps fuel these discussions, contributing to them becoming enlightening and engaging, as I hope they are. Well, until the next episode, continue engaging in critical dialogues, reflect on your practices, and always keep your revolutionary spirit alive. Thank you, and see you on November 2nd. Remember, you can catch the live episodes through our Riverside studio and later find the recorded episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, and anywhere else that you can find podcasts. It ought to be there. Stay connected and updated by following our podcast and like the UAF Social Work page on Facebook and follow A Conscious Party on Instagram. This episode of The Critical Social Worker was recorded live on Monday, October 23rd. Today's episode featured Dr. Michael Yellowbird, and it was hosted by Christian A. Stettler and Fawn White. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, this has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. Until next time, keep being revolutionary. Peace.